Stop settling for weak sound. It's time to level up your game and bring the boom. Hit the town with the ultra-durable LG X Boom portable speaker and enjoy vibrant sound wherever you go. Elevate your listening experience to new heights because, let's be real, your music deserves it. The future of sound is now with LG X Boom. And for a limited time, save 25% at LG.com with code FALL25. Bring the boom. X Boom.
In too many Chicago neighborhoods, access to fresh food is a luxury, not a given. Gardeneers is working to change that by supporting school garden programs that empower students to grow their own produce, learn about nutrition, and fight back against systemic food injustice. These aren't just gardens, they're pathways to health, education, and equity. Learn how you can help at gardeneers.org. Let's grow food justice in Chicago together.
Okay, so welcome again to the Explaining History podcast, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Joanna Lillis. If you're a fan of the podcast and you have been listening for an awful long time, you'll probably recall that Joanna came on the podcast about 7 years ago, I think, to talk about her a book on Kazakhstan, which I think was Dark Shadows, wasn't it? Which was the product of kind of many years of reportage in Kazakhstan. And we're delighted to have Joanna back today because your new book, Silk Mirage, on Uzbekistan, is, I believe, it's being published in sort of the near future, and so I think what would be great to do today is explore not just the book itself and some of the themes involved, but about Uzbekistan as well, which probably there's a dearth of knowledge in general about. So firstly, welcome, and let us begin.
Thanks, Nick. It's great to be back on Explaining History. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Super. So, firstly, tell us about the idea of the book. Where did the idea of the book originate from? Tell us all about that.
Well, I've got a long-standing interest in Uzbekistan. I'm based in Kazakhstan and I have been for 20 years now, actually. But I have a long-standing interest in Uzbekistan because it's the country that I first moved to when I moved to Central Asia. That was back in 2001. And I worked in Uzbekistan for about 4 years before moving to Kazakhstan. And even after moving to Kazakhstan, I've spent a lot of time traveling to Uzbekistan. Obviously, I have a lot of friends there, some professional interests. So I'm a journalist based in Central Asia, and always many interesting things happening in Uzbekistan. So really, after I finished my first book, Dark Shadows, or a sort of contemporary portrait of Kazakhstan, at some point I started thinking that it would be interesting and useful to do something similar on Uzbekistan.
Right.
Not least because there's not that much out there on Uzbekistan. You know, there are books, but there's no kind of portrait that tries to bring the whole thing together, the contemporary portrait, and also looking at a bit of history, which is, of
Hmm.
course, why we're here today.
So, I mean, with Uzbekistan itself, I mean, did you spend a significant amount of time there in order to get the sense of the country? I mean, did you relocate there at all, or is it kind of um, from where you're based in Kazakhstan, was going back and
Yeah.
forth manageable?
Oh, yes. Well, I mean, the thing about Uzbekistan, you know, as I say, I lived there from 2001 to 2005, and
Oh
that
yes,
this was a period when Uzbekistan was one of the world's harshest dictatorships, actually.
hmm
You know, it went through a period for the first 25 years of its independence. It gained independence in 1991,
hmm
like the rest of the former Soviet countries when the Soviet Union collapsed. And for the first 25 years of its independence, it really turned into one of the world's, you know, worst, most harsh, most brutal dictatorships.
Yeah,
Now, I lived there during that time, and I worked at the time for the BBC, but not as a journalist on the streets, but in an office job
right,
where we sort of monitored the media. So I was very closely involved with everything that was happening in Uzbekistan via the prism of what the media was reporting domestically in Uzbekistan and also the media in exile, because no independent media inside Uzbekistan.
yeah,
And then after I moved to Kazakhstan, I did continue to visit regularly. And at the time, you know, after 2005 or so, it was virtually impossible for any journalist to operate pretty much in Uzbekistan. That the dictatorship, the things that had happened there, we can talk about that later. There was a particularly violent incident in a city called Andijan in 2005. And after that, what was already a very brutal dictatorship engaged in a massive crackdown on civil
right,
society and journalists. But after that, I continued to visit, not as a journalist, but in a sort of private capacity. And I continued to also do a little bit of reporting, sort of a little bit under the radar.
sure,
Really, what was a game changer for being able to actually write a book on Uzbekistan was the death of the dictator in 2016. Islam Karimov died after 25 years in power, and his successor, Shavkat Mirziyoyev, who's still the president now, came to power, and he unexpectedly launched some reforms that became dubbed kind of the Uzbek Spring, a little bit hyperbolic, but
yeah,
it did. What part of those reforms included opening up to journalists, and so for a number of years, for about 5 years, I was officially able to work as a journalist in Uzbekistan, and I still lived in Kazakhstan, but spent a lot of time traveling to Uzbekistan and researching for the book, doing my reporting. That's closed down a bit again now. You know, I don't have permission to work in Uzbekistan right now because things have gone, you know, a little bit more, let's say, autocratic. But that's the situation. So my background in Uzbekistan, the background for the book is exactly that I was 4 years living there, and then for the last 20 years been traveling there very regularly. And for the years that I was writing the book, mainly researching the book, I had a lot of access to Uzbekistan because I had official permission to work. So it was quite possible to do all the research for the book, even though Uzbekistan can be a challenging country, even if you have permission to work, because, you know, it's still a very autocratic state.
yeah. With the book, what would you say? What are the kind of the core themes that you investigate in the book or explore? Would you say?
Well, I mean, the core themes will be politics. You know, where did Uzbekistan come from? Well, that'll be more like history. So let's say politics. Let's start with politics. Politics being, you know, what were the politics of Uzbekistan for the first 25 years of independence under the dictatorship, and how has that changed? Since Shavkat Mirziyoyev came to power and launched what became called the sort of Uzbek Spring. I mean, the Uzbeks don't really use that term, but they call it New Uzbekistan. So trying to kind of reform the dictatorship. So I've looked at that, and I've looked at what's changed because of Mirziyoyev and his reforms, and
Right.
also what hasn't changed for Uzbeks. And I've also looked at the kind of difficulties in the book, which is called Silk Mirage. I've looked at the difficulties of kind of dragging a country out of dictatorship. You know, there might be all the will in the world, and it's still a really difficult thing to do. I
Sure.
also look at economic reforms, look at the economy. It was a real kind of when I lived there, it was a real basket case. I mean, it didn't function properly. There was a black market in currency. There were no cash points, for example. This is in the early 2000s. There were no cash points in Uzbekistan that you could use to take cash out from your bank card. These kind of very basic things, it was very dysfunctional because of very protectionist policies. So I've looked at the reforms and the kind of quite successful free market reforms. I've also looked at the roles of the families of these presidents, which have been not always, let's say, beneficial for the country. Massive corruption scandals, the jailing of the first president's daughter.
Yeah.
I've also looked at the media because that's something close to my heart, talking to journalists about whether they can have a report more freely. And I've also examined kind of issues like civil society, how do they function now, and kind of also some more quirky kind of things like how the kind of greater possibilities of freedom of speech under the new president, 9 years ago now, have kind of sparked these kind of culture wars that we're very familiar with in the West.
Right.
And finally, I would say, well, not finally actually, but as well as that, I also look at some cultural issues like some art, some kind of the silk industry, because my book is called Silk. Mirage, and Uzbekistan is famous for silk. I look at art, which has some unexpected kind of phenomena that come out of Uzbekistan, including a very, very, a sort of very, very extensive and astonishing collection of art that's squirreled away in the desert, avant-garde art. And finally, I'm going to say finally, but only because I want to finish with that, I do look at Uzbekistan's history.
Yeah.
Because I want to see, it's mostly a portrait of contemporary Uzbekistan, but of course we need to know, where did Uzbekistan come from in order to see where it's got to today.
And where it is at the moment, obviously you have, after the end of the Soviet Union, the Americans made certain inroads into former Soviet Central Asia. A lot of those states were very useful places during the War on Terror, useful sites to spirit people away to. There's nothing like having a brutal dictator as a friendly guy, is there? And now you have a resurgent Russia. This is very kind of aggressive, expansionist, nationalist Russia, and an extremely powerful China. And does Uzbekistan find itself kind of in the middle of kind of great power relations there?
Absolutely. I mean, the whole of Central Asia finds itself in the middle of great power relations. I mean, Central Asia is sandwiched here between Russia and China. Now, Uzbekistan doesn't share a border with either, but that doesn't alter the kind of geopolitical position that we have here. And nor does it alter the fact that those are its powerful regional neighbors. Now, generally speaking, all the Central Asian countries enjoy pretty good relations, or either pretty good or very good relations with both Russia and China. Now, Uzbekistan is an interesting one because Uzbekistan, under the dictatorship, it was very, very isolationist. Not as much as Turkmenistan, which is a real hermit state, or at least was, but it was very isolationist, and also the president was extremely prickly about the colonial era. Unlike some of his neighbors, for example, in Kazakhstan, always reluctant to, they don't criticize Russia or its role, but kind of try to look at it as a joint history. And if there were tragedies, then they were kind of joint tragedies with Russia, if you like. But under the dictatorship, Islam Karimov was quite critical of Russia, and he used to talk about the colonial vice, and he used to be kind of, he saw himself as the founding father of Uzbekistan, even though, because he was the first president, even though independence was thrust upon him when the Soviet Union collapsed. But it was an interesting one in the region because, as I say, he wasn't particularly close to Russia, and he was kind of hostile to it at certain times. He would also make efforts to kind of eradicate some of the, say, moving statues in Tashkent that were too redolent of the Soviet era. Now, the new president, well, I keep saying new, he's been there for 9 years. The current president, Shavkat Mirziyoyev, it seems to me, is taking Uzbekistan a bit closer to Russia, and it certainly has made no hostile comments, particularly about Russia. And it's fair to say that there were constant contacts between all of the Central Asian leaders and Russian leadership. constant visits as well. China, a very important partner for all the states. And so Uzbekistan finds itself very close to China as well. However, it's interesting, actually, just right now or recently at in New York, we're seeing Trump praising Mirziyoyev, the Uzbek president, because they've just concluded some big business deals. America is after the rare earths that Uzbekistan is rich in, and there's been some quite cozying up between the two of them. So that's to show that like the Central Asian states generally, Uzbekistan tries not to take sides really in these kind of clashes, in these kind of it tries to the Central Asian states tend to have what they call multi-vector policy. We're friends with everybody. In the past, under Karimov, Uzbekistan had a tendency to kind of flip-flop. If America annoyed them by criticizing human rights, they would kind of flip to Russia and then flip back to America. But now things are a bit more consistent. And the answer for Uzbekistan to being sandwiched between these great powers and subject to these great power politics is to kind of try and cultivate good relations with all of them and try to walk that tightrope. It's a difficult one, but it's a very sensible thing to do in the circumstances in which they find themselves.
And do they have a role in China's Belt and Road Initiative? Are there railways and other things that pass through Uzbekistan as part of that?
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. There is, for example, a major gas pipeline that goes from Turkmenistan Turkmenistan through Uzbekistan and on to China through Kazakhstan. There are railway projects. There's a major railway project that is supposed to be just getting going now after many years of talking, which is going to link China with Uzbekistan for the first time via Kyrgyzstan. Right. And there are many, many other projects. So China is a big partner, and Uzbekistan is trying to position itself as a kind of a cog on a buckle in the Belt and Road, if you like. Even though it doesn't share a border, it also likes to position itself. Kazakhstan for China is a more obvious route westwards because it shares a border and then goes onwards to the Caspian Sea, Turkey, or onto Russia northwards. But Uzbekistan also tries to position itself, saying, look, we can offer routes southwards as well. And to do that, Uzbekistan is trying to build projects with Afghanistan, railways through Afghanistan, and so on.
And could these things, transform Uzbekistan? Economically, there are. I suppose there are numerous examples in the world of countries that they leverage their geopolitical position, and then very quickly, within a generation, there are extraordinary transformations.
Only Boost Mobile.
Boost Mobile
will give you a free year of service.
Free year?
When you buy a new 5G phone.
New 5G phone?
Enough.
But I'm your hype man. When you purchase an eligible device, you get $25 off every month for 12 months with credits totaling 1 year of free service. Taxes extra for the device and service plan. Online only.
Hey, folks, it's Mark Marin from WTF. Today, I want to talk to you about Boost Mobile, offering reliable nationwide coverage backed by a 30-day money-back guarantee. Love your service or get your money back, no questions asked. Boost Mobile offers the coverage, network speed, and service you're used to, but at more affordable prices. Why pay more if you don't have to? You can get an unlimited plan for $25 a month that will never increase in price, ever. No price hikes, no multi-line requirements, no stress. Visit your nearest Boost Mobile store or find them online at boostmobile.com. After 30 gigabytes, customers may experience slower speeds. Customers will pay $25 per month as long as they remain active on the Boost Unlimited plan.
Tonight's meal, tilapia surprise with boiled cabbage. Begin cooking steps 1 through 50 now.
Are you kidding me? Making dinner shouldn't feel like doing a 1,000-piece puzzle. With Blue Apron's new one-pan assemble and bake meals, the hard part's already done. Pre-chopped ingredients, zero stress. Just assemble, bake, and enjoy. No complicated steps, no mountain of dishes. Try Assemble and Bake today. Get 20% off your first 2 orders with code APRON20. Terms and conditions apply. Visit blueapron.com/terms for more.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's definitely a possibility, and I do think that the leadership has some vision.
Hmm.
I think that unlike the previous regime, the one that they took over from and they emerged from, actually, they seem to have a much more, I would say, they have a slightly more empathetic approach to the problems of the people. Although that does not extend to affording the people political freedoms or freedom of speech in full. But there's that Uzbekistan is a very young country, by which I mean the population is very young, the birth rates are high, and I believe there are about 500,000 new people coming onto the job market at least every year.
Right.
And they can't give them all jobs, and because of that, many of them go abroad to work. They're labor migrants, mostly in Russia, and that's just a fact of life, But the government does seem to have. It claims, I mean, I haven't double checked the figures, but only the last few days it was claiming to have lifted many, many people out of poverty over recent years. And I think that they do have some kind of feeling for the problems that people suffer because there is widespread poverty in Uzbekistan. If you go to the capital Tashkent, it looks pretty glitzy. And you go to the Silk Road cities, Samarkand, Bukhara, of course, it all looks nice and glossy, but that masks a lot of rural poverty.
Yeah.
So I think that the government is trying to use its imagination and innovation and try to say, how can we leverage the opportunities that you talked about as countries try to do? And I think they will continue to do that. And it's quite possible. I mean, the fact is that the economy has improved remarkably under Mirziyoyev. I mean, we can't. Compared to his predecessor, when, as I mentioned, it was something of a basket case. We can't compare figures for growth because basically under Karimov's Uzbekistan, they would just pluck the figures out of the air and just say that everything was great. But, it is obvious that they're sustaining much better growth and that they are looking to leverage all these infrastructure projects and try to position themselves as this hub and cooperating with neighbors, Central Asian neighbors and Afghanistan too, in order to try and do that, in order to try and boost the importance of Central Asia on a practical level on the world stage, so that people see it as a hub and a bridge between East and West.
Yeah. You mentioned Afghanistan. I wonder, obviously, throughout most of your time in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, war and kind of occupation have been the fate of Afghanistan. And obviously, I don't, there isn't the time really or the scope to go into that. But I just wonder what the effect on Uzbekistan has been of everything that's happened in Afghanistan.
Well, pretty profound. I mean, Uzbekistan shares a border with Afghanistan. It's a pretty well sealed border actually, because mostly, and during all these years there hasn't been much spillover into Uzbekistan from all the troubles in Afghanistan, unlike Tajikistan, which is a much poorer, much weaker state and has a much more porous border with Afghanistan. But the impact on the psyche, the impact on policy has always been enormous. I mean, Uzbekistan, even under Karimov, was a proponent of kind of not isolating Afghanistan because it creates so many problems for Uzbekistan when that's the case. Afghanistan is Uzbekistan's gateway to seaports, to Pakistan, to Iran, to India, to big markets. So it's always been a proponent of not isolating Afghanistan. And right now, it's very interesting to see that, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Central Asia, generally, they're kind of leading calls to kind of de-isolate Afghanistan to a degree because they think it's punishing the people. And also, of course, from the pragmatic point of view, they think it's punishing themselves too.
Yeah.
So they are kind of, they would like to see they are cooperating with the Taliban regime, on practical levels. But over the years, it's fair to say that the war in Afghanistan, the fact that ethnic Uzbeks are a major group in northern Afghanistan, that one major warlord during the war, which war, but over in the 90s and 2000s was General Dostum was an ethnic Uzbek. We've certainly seen it's a huge impact on Uzbekistan, and it's also it's a huge impact anyway to have a war-torn country on your borders that's a constant source of instability and terrorism. And that's actually why they want to cooperate with Afghanistan, to stop that and to try and promote stability.
Well, all the UN data shows that, despite the kind of the hysteria in Western countries about refugees, about 80% of all refugees remain internally in the country that they're displaced in, and the other 98%, the other sort of 28, 29% or so, or 18, 90% or so, come to the neighboring country. So I'm guessing refugee crises from Afghanistan have affected Uzbekistan.
Well, actually, I'm going to say not hugely, because because they don't have a very it maybe sounds uncharitable, but they don't have a very welcoming policy towards refugees from Afghanistan or from anywhere. So they have had some Afghan refugees, but I suppose the nature of the dictatorship during most of the crises meant that they weren't able to actually enter Uzbekistan. There's a big bridge, a very heavily guarded big bridge over the Amudara that prevented them from entering. So although when I lived in Uzbekistan, I used to work with some Afghans who were refugees. There are refugees there, but there's none of the problems that are faced by countries like Iran, Pakistan. They don't have nowhere near this level. We're talking like, not single figures maybe, but barely four figures, I'm sure, three figures perhaps. Tajikistan's had more of an issue, but even there the numbers are pretty low, although they've been expelling them lately. So yes, I mean the Central Asian countries are not, to be honest, major refugee destinations because they're not very welcoming to refugees, and I guess mostly because of that, probably.
And I guess my final question is one of kind of curiosity in a way. So little is known about this part of the world. Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan. And the way that you describe it, I remember vividly the way that you described Kazakhstan when we last spoke, was of this kind of fascinating, vibrant, complicated, quite troubled, but also quite kind of,
Only Boost Mobile.
Boost Mobile.
We'll give you a free year of service.
Free year?
When you buy a new 5G phone.
New 5G phone?
Enough.
But I'm your hype man. When you purchase an eligible device, you get $25 off every month for 12 months with credits totaling 1 year of free service. Taxes extra for the device and service plan. Online only.
A PSA from Instacart. It's Sunday, 5 p.m. You had a non-stop weekend. You're running on empty. And so is your fridge. You're in the trenches of the Sunday scaries. You don't have it in you to go to the store, but this is your reminder. You don't have to. You can get everything you need delivered through Instacart so that you can get what you really need. More time to do whatever you want. Instacart. For one less Sunday scary, we're here.
Expansive and fascinating country. And this seems to be a part of the world that has an enormous amount to offer. It seems to be a part of the world that, as is often and unfortunately the case, is wedged between great powers and has to make complex choices. And do you see kind of a greater future for these former Soviet Central Asian states on the world stage, do you think? In decades?
That's a really good question. The Central Asian states have always been overlooked. They kind of fall between, too many gaps. I mean, they're not, when it comes to the former Soviet Union, all eyes are on Russia and, of course, on Ukraine right now. But, Russia dominates the discourse. And now, of course, it's war in Ukraine dominates the discourse. And, you've seen countries like the Central Asian states kind of fall out of the narrative and no attention is paid to them. And as a journalist, I feel this strongly because, sometimes it's hard for us to get our editors to kind of publish stuff, even when important things are happening, especially domestically. Over the years, there've been many things happening in these countries, such as, abuses of human rights and so on, that if they were happening in Russia, there would be a huge outcry, but they kind of just fall between the gaps.
Yeah.
So they have always been overlooked. However, I mean, I think I'm a little bit optimistic about the international prospects for Central Asia, not so much the domestic prospects, because of the repression and human rights abuses, but I think Central Asia is having a bit of a moment right now. And in fact, Uzbekistan is a bit of a game changer. It's been the key to unlocking cooperation within Central Asia. So I can explain what I mean by that. Under Karimov, the 25 years of dictatorship, Uzbekistan was really prickly, really isolationist, really hostile towards most of its neighbors. It had terrible relations with Tajikistan, terrible relations with Kyrgyzstan, well, and then pretty like poor to mediocre relations with the other two neighbors at various times. Well, yeah, so it was a pretty terrible. I mean, there were times when Karimov would not exactly threaten war, but warn. Threatened war, but he would warn that water disputes over water can lead to war, so it's kind of a veiled threat. There was once a rumor, no doubt it's not true, but I still repeat it. I'd still like to repeat it because it's kind of a bit telling that Karimov once had a fight with a fist fight with the president of Tajikistan at one of their meetings. So this is how bad relations were. Now, when Mirziyoyev came to power, one of the best things he's done, in my opinion, has been to simply turn a new leaf with all the Central Asian states. For example, signing historic border agreements over borders that have been disputed for 30 years, where people die. I mean, not in huge numbers, but regularly there'd be kind of shootouts on the borders, and regularly people would die. And he also just embracing all the Central Asian neighbors. And because Uzbekistan is in the middle and shares borders with all of the others, and because it's the biggest, well, not biggest geographically, but most populous country, this has kind of unlocked an era of cooperation. Right. And in fact, only right now at the UN General Assembly in New York, Mirziyoyev has mentioned a phrase I haven't heard him say before. He likes to talk about his new Uzbekistan, which is quite a lot of hyperbole, but he talked at the UN General Assembly about a new Central Asia. And I actually, it is hyperbolic, but I do think that there's an element of truth in that. It's also true to say that world powers are these days they've come courting Central Asia, partly because of Russia's war in Ukraine. So they've been looking for alternative routes, transport routes. Also, of course, everybody's courting Central Asia for the rare earths and critical minerals. But this gives Central Asia opportunities, and because they are now cooperating together, this increases their opportunities. And it also in fact, it was interesting to me as well to see Mirziyoyev, I think, and also the Kyrgyz president talking about their countries at the UN General Assembly this autumn, talking about their countries as examples for others. We have used peace to resolve our border disputes, and so the world is so much of the world is at war, so we can be an example. And I think there's an element of truth in that. Yeah. So I do have some optimism for Central Asia. I mean, I think it's always going to be, in a way, a peripheral region, but it's also an important region. And I think if they can cooperate together and leverage the opportunities and walk that diplomatic tightrope between Russia, China, and the West, especially with America being so volatile, I think there could be a bright future for Central Asia.
Well, let's leave it there. And the book Silk Mirage is available in all good bookshops now.
Silk Mirage will be published by Bloomsbury on the 13th of November. Okay. It's available for pre-order on all good bookshop, the websites of good bookshops, Bloomsbury, and on Amazon, of course. And I'd just like to say that we cover so much more in Silk Mirage, but I know that the listeners are very interested in history. Well, I talk about how Uzbekistan came into being, not just obviously 30 odd years ago, but about a century ago. And how did that happen? Through a group of Muslim modernizers that were kind of trying to shake up their world. So I'd urge anyone who's interested, read Silk Mirage, and I hope you enjoy it. And thank you very much, Nick.
Thank you so much. And as we always say, if you can buy it from an independent bookshop or directly from the publisher, please do, because then the funds go where they're most needed. And
absolutely.
Thanks very much, Joanna. It was a pleasure, and I do hope we get to do this again.
Thanks, Nick.
Cheers.
Bye.
Only Boost Mobile.
Boost Mobile.
We'll give you a free year of service.
Free year?
When you buy a new 5G phone.
New 5G phone?
Enough.
But I'm your hype man. When you purchase an eligible device, you get $25 off every month for 12 months with credits totaling 1 year of free service. Taxes extra for the device and service plan. Online only.
Hey, this is Jonathan Fields, host of the Good Life Project podcast. Boost Mobile reminds me of what I love, when someone reimagines what's possible. Offering reliable nationwide coverage backed by a 30-day money-back guarantee. While other carriers spend millions on flashy Super Bowl ads, Boost Mobile puts those dollars towards what matters more, delivering reliable nationwide coverage at prices that make you wonder why we've been paying so much. For just $25 a month, you get unlimited service that will never go up in price, not next year, not ever. And they're so confident you'll love it, they back it with a 30-day money-back guarantee, no questions asked. Want to see if Boost Mobile is right for you? Visit your nearest Boost Mobile store or boostmobile.com. Customers who cancel within 30 days of activation will have Boost service fees refunded, activation fees if applicable, and phone payments will not be refunded.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Explaining History. This podcast is an independent production, and it's listener support that keeps these conversations going week after week. If you find value in the show and want to help cover the costs of research and production, please consider making a contribution. You can join our community on Patreon or make a one-off donation. Just follow the links in the show notes for this episode. Every bit of support is truly appreciated. Thanks again for listening.